I'm going to call the work session to order. I'm sure we'll be joined by some other assembly members. I know that Assemblymember Drummond is in transit here, but we'll begin by going around and introducing ourselves, beginning with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Patrick Flynn, I'm for Assembly.
Jennifer Johnston.
Bernie Hall.
Albie Gray Jackson.
Alan Trombley.
Duke Training.
Judge Hensley, would you introduce yourself?
Good morning, I'm Dan Hensley.
Thank you. The purpose of the meeting today is for a report from Judge Hensley as the third-party investigator of the election. He has some opening comments that he's going to make, and at that point then we're going to have questions from the Assembly, Judge Hensley. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to everybody on the Assembly and all the other folks who are here. First of all, I want to thank you for asking me to work on this very important and interesting project. I appreciate it in several ways. First of all, I learned a lot about elections. Second of all, I learned a lot about the management of a small but very important office. And finally, and probably most importantly, I had the opportunity to talk with a lot of people who really care about the fairness of your elections and work very hard to make sure that your elections are fair. And I'm speaking about the volunteer election workers and some of your clerk's office staff who worked very hard and made all the difference in this election that we're talking about. What I want to do, and what I think my marching orders are here today, is I want to take maybe less than 10 minutes to highlight some issues in my report. I'm not going to go over the entire report. I want to address one issue that came up after the report was issued. Then I hope to answer any questions that you all may have of me. My main task in this investigation was to determine whether someone tried to manipulate the outcome of this election. As I stated in my report, and we'll talk about a little more later, I believe the answer to that is no. My second task was, well, if nobody intentionally tried to make this election turn out so bad, how could it have happened? How did it turn out so bad? I tried to address that in my report as well. I think we can sum that up today by saying that the people who mattered took their eye off the ball. That includes the leadership at the clerk's office. That also includes the Assembly. I'm not being critical of the Assembly, but I think it's something that needs to be said. You all are very busy people. You wouldn't be on the Assembly if you weren't busy and involved in public life. You're part-time on the Assembly. You have regular leadership and membership change. I think you all were in the right to assume that your clerk's office was running smoothly. Hindsight, retrospection is a wonderful thing. Now that we've had the opportunity to use that retrospection, all I can say is, and I'm sure you understand as well, that your clerk's office, you own it. To the extent that you provide more oversight and can support that office as much as possible, that will help prevent future catastrophes like the one we had in April. So to the first question, was there an attempt at manipulation of this election by election workers? I think I'll start by letting you know what material I had. The chair made it very clear to me from the beginning that this was an open book. He promised access to anything I needed. He ensured me of full cooperation of the staff, and that happened. I brought with me today most of the material that was provided to me. A lot of this material is computer printouts containing huge amounts of data. I was also, your IT folks provided me with access to private emails and personal files, which I reviewed carefully. Your staff cooperated fully. Some of your staff I interviewed more than once. Although you made some staffing changes at the clerk and the deputy clerk level, both of those folks made themselves available to me. We had extensive interviews, and I believe they were open and honest with me. Because of that, because of the access I had to so much data, to the personal information, to the interviews that I had, I have a level of confidence in my conclusion that none of your people, none of your election workers or staff did anything to try to manipulate this election. I do want to address an issue that came up after my report was issued. Some observers have suggested that the clerk's office shorted ballots to certain low-income precincts, and there was a suggestion made that this may have been an attempt to suppress votes in those precincts. I could not come to that conclusion when I issued my report. I reviewed the data again, and I still cannot come to that conclusion. Let me tell you why. As I noted in my report, the real problem in ballot allocation in this case was a failure to understand that the turnout for your April 2012 election was going to be a lot like the turnout in the 2006 election, not the turnout in the 2010 or 11 election. And as a result, 50 precincts received fewer ballots than the 2006 turnout in those precincts. I think all you have to do is look at those 50 precincts to dispel any suggestion that there was a focus on certain voters, either by economic circumstances or political persuasion. These precincts are everywhere, and they are random, and maybe I'll take you on a little geographic tour of the Anchorage Bowl. Peters Creek, precinct 160, was shorted 90 ballots compared to the voter turnout in 2006. All of these numbers will be compared to 2006. Chugiak, that's 165, was shorted 130 ballots. Eagle River was shorted 90 ballots. We'll move south a little bit. Joy Lutheran, 100 ballots were shorted. Creekside Elementary, 100 ballots. St. Patrick's Church, 125 ballots. Baxter Elementary, 150 ballots. Benny Benson School, 90 ballots. Let's go south some more. Diamond High had 90 fewer ballots allocated than the number of folks who voted there in 2006. Cloud Elementary, 100 ballots short compared to 2006. Mears Junior High, 150. Hanshu, 90. Abbott Loop, 120. Service High, 110. YMCA on Lake Otis Road, 90. To me, the randomness of those precincts answers the question as to whether there were any intentional focus on the shortage of ballots. There's another reason why I couldn't come to that conclusion, and that is the people who run these municipal elections, regardless of whether they're well-intentioned or not, know that a single person working in the clerk's office can't suppress votes by shorting ballots in a particular precinct. And here's why. And here's how it works. Regardless of what a person in the clerk's office does, you have at least two independent workers at every precinct. If they begin to run short of ballots, their job is to pick up the phone and call a troubleshooter or Election Central and ask for more ballots. In the ordinary course of business, short of the chaos we had in 2012, those ballots are delivered, nobody's shorted, everybody gets to vote. So the only way for someone in the clerk's office to suppress votes by shorting ballots is to be in cahoots with the precinct workers. In other words, to be in cahoots with the precinct workers and have the precinct workers also fail to call for more ballots. As we learned from this election, those precinct workers are not reluctant to call when they need more ballots. I think the biggest complaint that you heard about this election was precinct workers calling in and trying to get more ballots and unable to do that in the same random precincts that I talked about a minute ago. As far as I can tell, not one precinct who was shorted ballots failed to call and ask for more ballots. Let's look at the real damage caused by the ballot allocation. And that is voters who were turned away or sent elsewhere to vote. There were a number of precincts, but many of them had maybe 12, 15 voters. I'm going to take the 4 precincts that had 25 or more persons either turned away or sent someplace else to vote. East Anchorage United Methodist Church, that's precinct 300, had 25 folks who were either sent away, turned away, or told to go someplace else to vote. Naka Valley Elementary School, that's precinct 330, had 100 plus sent away or told to go someplace else to vote. Platt Elementary, that's precinct 745, 150 folks, and Alaska Club South, precinct 820, 150 votes, pretty random precincts as well in terms of the real damage that occurred from the shorting of the ballots. And the last thing I'll say is that I had the opportunity to view the employee who made the ballot allocation decisions based on my interview with her and all of the other data that I had. I can't come to the conclusion that there was any intention to focus on any economic group or any other voting group when the ballots were sorted. Let's move from that issue. I want to make one other point, and then I'll try to answer any questions that you may have. You'll notice from my report that I made some general suggestions on how to move ahead, to move forward, and try to prevent this from occurring again. Those included oversight, making sure that the municipal clerk has a working knowledge of the election process, those kind of things. But there's something that I carefully did not do. I did not suggest the adoption of any specific protocols or guidelines or rules. I also did not make any recommendations for code changes. And I did not do those things for two reasons. I'm not an expert in day-to-day election management. I took counsel from others who have run successful elections in making my recommendations. One thing I did not want to do was make detailed, specific recommendations and then restrict your clerk, your new clerk, from figuring out what works best for the office and then adopting new rules and regulations and protocols that help the clerk do that job. For the same reason, I didn't make recommendations for code changes. I think the code changes come at the end of the process, not at the beginning. I think we should give your clerk an opportunity to figure out how things work best, to adopt methods that work best, and then if code changes are needed, they can be made to accommodate what the clerk has figured out. I've talked to the clerk, I've talked to the new deputy clerk. It seems to me that both of those folks are already diving into this and have a real interest and commitment into figuring out what will work best for them in terms of day-to-day election management, and that's certainly far better than having me do that. I think the best thing I can add before I conclude is that we all hope they receive all the support they can get from you so that this does not happen again. And again, thank you for the opportunity to do this work. It was very interesting to me, and I hope it was helpful to you. And I would really like to answer any questions any of you all may have.
Well, let me tell you how much we appreciate the thorough job that you did. I know that a tremendous amount of time was put into this. I'd also like to let the minutes reflect that during Judge Hensley's presentation, we were joined by Assembly Members Drummond and Osiander. And with that, I didn't see anyone raise their hand during the presentation. Abby?
I'd just like to touch on the supplemental report that you sent out.
Sure.
In regards to the voting machines and the reinstitution of the technical board, the data processing review board. If you could just touch on that and say, hey, should there be a review after the election, random precincts versus the machines? Should we you feel that we should institute that board back? If you could just hit the high points of that.
I'll hit the high points. Sure. And I'll apologize ahead of time. I'm going to dodge your question a little bit.
Not a problem.
This task came up after I was initially signed on, and it came up this way. There was an observation that this data processing review board had been disbanded, and maybe that had something to do with the real problems that you all experienced in April. And the question to me was, wait a minute, some of us have never heard of that board. Who are they? How did they, one, come into existence, and two, what happened to them? So my real charge was limited to that, and that's what I tried to do. In the course of that, I learned from former members of the Data Processing Review Board that there was some difference of opinion on the board as to whether their services were really necessary or not. I stopped at that point. This is highly technical information. There are differences of opinion. I think that's something that the clerk's office ought to explore after taking counsel from people who do this kind of work, and then make a decision from there. My charge wasn't to make a recommendation on that. I threw out the information that I found so that it would be food for thought for you all. The one recommendation I did make that seemed pretty obvious to me was that the random counts, just to confirm that the machines were working, was something that had been lost in the transition from the data processing review board to the AccuVote test board. That was certainly something that you ought to consider. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Just to follow up. Was, from the information you gathered, the accuracy of the machines, I don't want to put you on the spot to say yes or no. Of course, I understand that it's technical information, but from what you've written in the supplemental, would you say that those you talked to felt that the machines were accurate enough to continue with that machine? Not your personal opinion, but the people that you spoke with.
All right, I'll just say this. I asked your chair, you don't want me to research whether these machines are accurate. That's a big controversy. He said, no, I don't want you to research whether these machines are accurate. So with that, I think most of the people who do this work believe that these optical scanning devices are pretty accurate.
Okay, thank you.
That doesn't mean that there's not controversy or difference of opinion.
I understand. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Anyone else?
Judge Hensley, in your report, you, I don't know that you made a recommendation, but you made the comment in there that you felt that the solution to this problem would have ballots in central locations where they could be easily distributed where they needed. I can tell you that probably the feelings around this table is that we're going to print the ballots, we're going to put them in precincts. But my question was, why did you make that comment? Or I would consider it a comment, not necessarily a recommendation.
One of the complaints that the clerk's office has received from election workers is, not all, but some, is that they have too many leftover ballots and they have to take care of them and provide security for them. And I suspect that's one of the things that drove the deputy clerk into being parsimonious with the ballots this time around. Now, if you have a precinct worker and you have 30% turnout and you have 70% of the ballots there that they don't use, that's extra work for the precinct workers, both in terms of hauling things around, but also in terms of security. So that's why I didn't recommend mandatory placement of all of the ballots in each precinct. I don't think it hurts, because you're going to hear complaints from the precinct workers about that. And that's the reason I looked at the Election Commission's recommendation that you have ballots placed in hubs around the city, still under security, but more easily available for distribution. You just need to know that if you send all the ballots to the precincts, you're going to hear about it from your election workers. Maybe that's okay, but you need to know that's going to happen.
And
Mr. Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Hensley, appreciate it. Your comments raised a thought in my mind, which is enough of my colleague, Ms. Johnston. One of the challenges that we face with local elections is the variety of ballots that have to be printed and distributed.
You know where this is going.
I was very gentle here.
Watch out. Watch out. Yeah, you're a sandwich.
Yeah. You're surrounded by
Gosh,
That's what service for.
Well, I guess it is a question. Is there, do you have any thoughts on how we might perhaps consolidate the way we treat the different service areas within the city in the electoral process, so that we do not have to have so many different kinds of ballots, and the challenge of distribution or additional distribution should become necessary be lessened?
Your former deputy clerk and others who have allocated ballots all told me, and they were unanimous, that one of the most difficult parts of ordering and allocating ballots was the service area ballots. So I think we all are in agreement that should be addressed. I have heard that people are considering mail ballots for the service area. That would take the pressure off of the clerk in terms of ordering and allocating ballots. I know there are issues with mail ballots, but I've heard that as a suggestion. And I guess all I could say is that anything you can do to reduce, to get the service area votes off of the main ballot, if possible, would make the clerk's job much easier and reduce the chance for the kind of problems that we've had here.
And that is dangerous.
Good, that's a good idea. I like that a lot, because I think it's ridiculous that we have to produce, I don't know, 50 different ballots for a city this small.
any other questions?
Debbie's
Ms. Lucian?
Judge Hensley, considering it sounds like the wide scope of material you've reviewed, is there any particular document or source that you think is going to be particularly helpful to not only the clerk's office, but to our own Assembly's Committee on Elections as we move forward? Anything that you think we should focus on?
I'll give you an anecdote answer, if I may.
Sure.
One of the things that I found as I was looking through the documents, that your precinct workers are asked to fill out reports at the end of the day. I can't remember what it's called.
Election worker feedback.
Yeah, it's an election worker. Ms. Duke, the former deputy clerk, told me that in her first year, she went over every one of those. Actually, the new deputy clerk, Amanda Moser, was a seasonal part-time worker doing elections at the time, and they went over those and tried to review that input and make changes that the election workers told them about, and that they found that information very helpful. One of the things that doesn't ordinarily happen after an election is interviews of all the election workers. I ran a compilation of the written comments that were made at the end of the hectic day by your election workers and the interviews of the election workers that were made by the Election Commission, and found that the same information often wasn't contained in both. And I have an interesting example here. Precinct 520, the written form said no significant issues. The interview said, we ran out of ballots, we used question ballots, and we sent some other people to other precincts.
Wow.
On the other hand, Precinct 515 said, we ran out at 5:30 on the written reports, redirected 12 voters to the First Presbyterian Church, called the troubleshooter at 5, more ballots arrived at 5:50, and we needed a replacement AccuVote. The only thing it didn't say that you all learned, or the Election Commission learned in the later interviews, was that they turned 12 to 15 people away and sent them to other precincts. So the written reports from your election workers, the people on the ground, are very helpful. Your clerk's office might, I actually talked to Amanda Moser about this, might ought to think about ways of making sure you get really good feedback. Maybe not from tired people at the end of the day, but maybe later on. But I think that's a really useful piece of information.
Yeah, that should be stressed in training.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Johnson.
Well, you brought up training, and one of the issues that we've heard both sides, good and bad, is a lot of the training and a lot of the paperwork had been streamlined, and some felt that it may be over-streamlined. What was your take on that? And especially, I want to, for the Assembly, especially as we go forward, because there will be a lot of retiring election workers. And so it's, how do we address that, and is it something that our new clerk needs to look at?
I had access to the PowerPoint presentation training for the election workers, but not the offhand comments that go sometimes
Right.
with the PowerPoint. The complaints I heard from election workers was not about the training. They thought the training was pretty good, but as we know, there were apparently some comments made during the training that undermined some of the training. Some about the AccuVote machine, some about whether you're going to get fewer ballots or not. Most of them didn't really get any complaints from election workers that they thought the training was inadequate.
Mr. Trainee.
Judge, you know the AccuVote's used by the state. We've read their machines. And you find the information in the state problems they have with AccuVote too?
They love it. They like it. What I did obtain from the state, I talked to the state director of the Division of Elections, and they have a comprehensive training manual for use with the AccuVote machines. And I obtained a copy of that, and I forwarded it on to Assembly Council to give to the clerk for whatever reasons whatever use they might make of it.
Some people think the AccuVote's some strange system that we got, but we rent them every election from the state. They reuse them for the primary and the general from the state.
Well,
Thank you, Judge.
I was aware of that, and it seemed to me that if you're going to use their machines, it might help to also use their training material,
manual,
and
absolutely.
so I obtained those for you.
Mr. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's been a lot of controversial blogs, if you will, about AccuVote machines. And some of it is probably true, and some of it may not be true. But considering the importance of municipal elections and the results of there being problems with machines, would you recommend that we look a little bit more into the machines that we're using and some of the comments that have been made regarding their regarding the issues?
Yes, I don't think that would hurt. I know a lot of consideration has been, based on my review of materials, a lot of consideration has already been given to that issue, including some of the comments in the past years, but I don't think it ever hurts to look at criticism and comments and decide whether you're making the right decision.
And do a little bit of testing. I think it's very important, especially now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Drummond.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge. I appreciate taking on this task. As a follow-up to the AccuVote question, did you hear along the way that these machines are reaching the end of their useful life and we're about to be, I believe the state is considering going to a different method of ballot counting, and the machines are in the neighborhood of 10 years old. Did that come up?
I heard along the way that they were 10 years old and they were reaching the end of their useful life. I don't know what the state's doing beyond that.
Okay. Since we seem to be relying on the state for the use of these machines. I know you didn't make any recommendations for code changes, but in looking at what transpired during this process, did you see that the code was followed or not followed? And or were your recommendations kind of specific to what the code said to do?
In terms of my task, focusing on what happened, basically transpired up and through the election day, I didn't come to the conclusion that the code was violated in any way.
Thank you.
Anyone else? If not,
A couple of things I'll share with you. I want you to know you weren't apologetic, but you were sympathetic to the fact that the Assembly bore some responsibility here. And I'm pleased to tell you that we have stepped up and accepted that responsibility. We've done apology to the committee for the fact that we had a failure, but this body has absolutely stepped up and acknowledged what you were maybe a bit timid about telling us, that a share of this burden lies on our shoulders as well. What I would appreciate you doing, I don't know if you've seen it or not, but because of Ms. Tucker working with a number of different committees, the group of 10 that filed for account and other documents that we received, the Election Commission has put together a working document that she's been working with Mr. Trombley on for the Election Committee, that he's now going to go to work on to look at protocols and if there are any changes that need to be made in Title 28. But I think it would be appropriate for you putting the time in that you did on this to take a look and see if there may be something blatant that we may have missed on those documents. It would be very helpful to us because we don't want to overlook anything in our process of making sure that our election next year is flawless. And I hope that we truly accomplish that in every way. And in closing, I would make a note that we received a note for the record from Gwen Matthews, Chairman of the Election Commission, that she would like to be noted, and that will be included in the minutes of this meeting. So with that, if there are no other questions, we stand adjourned. Thank you, Judge Hensley.
We got a whole hour.
We'll go on to the next one.
Yeah.
Go showers.
He said something. Oh, you weren't. Are you?